let's get started. Hopefully we have enough people joining now. So a bit of the intros. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on navigating compliance in the Atlassian ecosystem. I am your host, Dimitris. I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager at Upscale, part of the Adaptivist Group, and I focus on InfoSec and compliance. As you can see today, we do have a fantastic panel of experts, and each of them brings a unique perspective to the topic of compliance. Now, enough of that. That being said, let's quickly meet our panelists. I'd like to start by asking each and every one of you. We're going to start with the pink-haired Marion, and then go to Nick, and finally Andy. Floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. And thanks, Dimitris, to having invited us here. And the wig is there because I'm trying to balance out the seriousness of Andy, but it will come off now. It's very, very hot. So I'm Marion, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of SoftComply. And what we do is that we started 8 years ago with focusing on compliance solutions for regulated industries on Atlassian. And we went cloud first, then a little detour to DC, and then back to cloud again. So we provide document management and risk management solutions for regulated industries, particularly medical device industry. Our know-how is in these regulated industries, and this is what we'll also talk about. And of course, my focus also is to stress the importance of collaboration between Atlassian ecosystem players when it comes to compliance. None of us, even though I think Andrew and Nick know a lot, and Dimitris, about compliance, I don't think we know everything about it. And if we are working together, we might get closer to the answers our potential customers have. So to that end, we also started a compliance and Atlassian group of companies or vendors and solution partners. So trying to help the Atlassian users with compliance as best we can. That's it. That's me.
Great. Thanks, Marion. So hello, everyone. I'm Nick Wade, and I'm the co-founder and COO of Opus. And what we do, we say we're simplifying information governance, and we do that with a focus on modern SaaS, or your applications in the cloud. So our strict focus today is, compliance, and from a retention management or retention mandate sort of perspective, whether those are regulatory or from the standardized frameworks that you or your customers are trying to stay aligned with. Prior to starting Opus earlier this year, it's a very new company, and it's been quite a lot of fun. But I've done lots of other interesting things too. So prior to that, I worked in identity security at Auth0, and later Okta acquired Auth0. And I led both ecosystem platform and marketplace businesses at DigitalOcean and Atlassian for a long time, actually, before that. So I know these kinds of three-sided marketplace businesses pretty well. And prior to Atlassian, here's an interesting, strange fact that I never thought would intersect with my career again until we started Opus, which is that I actually worked over a decade ago in PM on products for e-discovery and compliance. When now compliance was a somewhat different picture back then than today's compliance. Everything that we were doing was kind of in your own data center or in a colo on your own servers. But all of that experience has lent itself pretty well to being here in the Atlassian ecosystem, simplifying information governance, starting with Atlassian Confluence and Atlassian Jira. So that's us, and got plenty of other things to say today, but I'm going to pass it on to serious man, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Nick. Well, hello, everybody. The last time I wore a suit for a work event was 2019, December, in a very, very big corporate world. So for me, it's a massive pleasure today to actually get very, very serious about a topic I'm quite passionate about, which many will find interesting. Why is this guy, who's normally known as the fun man, interested in compliance and InfoSec and cybersecurity and stuff like that? And that is actually because way back when I used to work on process design, process engineering, did a lot of the ITIL stuff, working a lot with teams from quality assurance. in ISO and all that sort of jazz. And just always shocked how when people are focused on their processes, on their people, on the products that they use, those famous 3Ps, how interesting it is that the cybersecurity diminishes and there's all these threats and everything like that. And it's funny to talk to people about, hey, do you have your 2FA switched on? And they go, what the hell is that? And you go, oh, that's interesting, right? There's a lot of areas within risk management and stuff like that, which I was in my former days as, you know, program manager, as project manager for different teams, would be heavily involved in all of the time. And you know, now owning my own company, it's amazing where we have to be careful what we're saying yes to and what apps we're connecting and what integrators and stuff like that. And so, you know, when you wake up one Saturday morning, you see a device, you get an email saying a device from this app is logged in Russia, you start panicking. And that happened to me literally just over the summer. So this is a hot topic, and I'm very much here as someone who's passionate more from the master user side and someone who uses the tools and is concerned about it. But also a lot of the companies that we help right now are marketplace based within the Atlassian ecosystem. So whilst we're helping them have fun, we also highlight, you know, where it's not going so far. So that's my 15 minutes of fame for today that I'll be helping out with.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all for the introductions. And it's time to dive into the main discussion points. So today we'll be focusing on 3 key themes: the challenges and opportunities in Atlassian compliance, the evolving ecosystem and the standards behind it, and finally, the importance of partnerships in navigating this landscape. So starting off and to kick off things, let's talk about the challenges organizations face when it comes to compliance in the Atlassian ecosystem, something that we're all intertwined in. Marion, you're first. Could you please elaborate on the differences in compliance challenges between data center and cloud environments in the Atlassian ecosystem? As we know, there's quite a shift happening currently in the ecosystem.
Sure. Thanks for that question. This is something that is on everybody's mind, I believe. And I mean, for those of you who have joined us and do not maybe know quite the big differences between DC, a data center, and cloud on Atlassian ecosystem. So in data center, you are self-hosting your infrastructure, and you are granted the full control over your environment. So updates, maintenance, everything, and of course compliance is under your control. It is highly customizable, of course, and you need to take care of the infrastructure, the security configurations, and the compliance measures. While when you are hosted and managed by Atlassian on cloud, Atlassian will handle a lot of that. So updates, maintenance, security will lie with Atlassian. So it helps the small teams for sure. And there is, I think, in the last couple of years, Atlassian has done an amazing job in terms of the certifications and standards it adheres to. So when you go to the Trust Center, it's pretty amazing how increasing the list, how long the list of standards there is, and it's I believe growing quite rapidly. The choices of which way to go, of course, depends on the industry you're in. So there are, in some industries, there are specific legal requirements that do not allow you to go to cloud. So defense and the federal government, for example. So there is no chance for those to go to cloud today. And then, of course, it comes to the size of the company also. So let's say that there are some, I will tell a little bit more about specific industry regulations in a second, but let's say about the size. So DC is feasible from 500 users onwards. So bigger companies. And if we think of regulated industries, then most of them are consolidated. So automotive, no problem being on DC, right? They have an IT department that can babysit the infra. When it comes to medical devices, it is very, very fragmented. 90% of medical device companies are small or medium sized. So for them, DC is a little bit too much. And they would rather have Atlassian take care of that. But now comes the really interesting requirement that these regulated industries have, and this is validation. This is to make sure that the software tools that are used by these industries work as expected. Automotive industry has a requirement of ISO 26262. It's a very nice number. Basically, car manufacturers need to be compliant with this standard. Atlassian itself does not need to be compliant because it doesn't manufacture cars. But in order for the automotive industry to use Atlassian cloud, or Atlassian products, they need to have documented, traceable changes of the system. So the history of all the changes that have happened in Confluence, Jira, Bitbucket, you name it. And these need to be documented. And if you can't have them, the cloud environments, they can't have use cloud, basically. Now, and let's say Atlassian will produce this documentation one day. And I know they're working in financial industry towards DORA. So they will try to get this documentation together. And this is nice if Atlassian could do it for Jira, let's say. But what about the third-party apps then? What about all the marketplace apps? Because they also need to be compliant with these requirements. So there is a lot of stuff there for regulated industries that needs to be done, and that we have started to kind of maybe fill these gaps, I would say, with validation, and we have done so for Confluence Cloud. So to look at it and then test it, but there is so much more to do still for the big business critical industries to come and look into cloud. Well, that's basically the main things. I could keep on talking, but I think Nick also wants to jump in here.
That's a great point, Marion. Thank you. And building on that, Nick, are there any specific regulatory considerations that amplify the challenges that were just mentioned?
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, of course, right? Compliance is a pretty big landscape today. So, Marion just pointed out that Atlassian's cloud services are actually quite mature, and they're pretty good for small companies today. And I definitely agree with that. I think that's very true. But it's a bit different for many enterprises. So, for example, Marion mentioned the ISO 26262 for the auto industry, but there's also in many verticals specific regulations, and then regulators who are now willing to enforce those across the vertical. And so clearly there's financial, there's healthcare, those kinds of regulations tend to make the challenges for larger enterprises moving to cloud pretty big as well. And I think Marion also mentioned that today, federal government departments and the contractors, us as suppliers wanting to work with the federal government don't have a lot of opportunities in the cloud to get there as well. Well, that's largely because, at least in the US, domestically here, you have regulations like FedRAMP at play. Now, there are ways in which companies and vendors and suppliers are getting ready to be able to satisfy all of those regulations so that enterprises can also look to take advantage of the expected ROI from moving away from, scaling their costs internally over to allowing an economy of scale that a cloud supplier can deliver to be relevant. But in the same breath, they also have to have a program of awareness of all the things that shift now that they used to do internally. And so again, this is something that Marion mentioned. Incidents and information used to be things that you contained internally that were held within your own data center or a colo that was hosting your servers, and you had expert people on staff to manage all of the aspects associated with those things. And it's totally different if you look to the cloud. Obviously, I'm saying something that's really obvious to most of us, right? A vendor compromise today is your compromise. And you just don't have control over everything vendors are doing. And not every vendor is as mature as Atlassian is when it comes to their cloud. And to complicate things just a little bit more, today there's over 340 SaaS applications in any given business that you look at. That number gets a bit higher as you look at enterprises. And it might sound wild, but it's well researched. It comes from Productive's State of SaaS research that was published earlier in 2024. And each of those SaaS apps all tend to have different capabilities and different maturities when it comes to cloud operations. So the complexities of staying compliant across all of that for your industry sort of tend to mount up, especially as your customer gets a bit larger.
Thank you, Nick. And to follow that theme a bit more now, Andy, we know there's a wider push to cloud, but with Atlassian's push towards cloud migrations, what do you think are the potential security challenges organizations, small, medium, large might face?
For me, it all starts with the knowledge of the customers and understanding what cloud means for them and where their data is going to be stored. And then the biggest one on top of that is after they've got their knowledge and they're really understanding it and they're diving into it, is looking at who is responsible for all of the data. So for anyone watching right now, just type Atlassian shared responsibility, and you will just find a lot of information about what your responsibilities are if you're going to move to the cloud. It is just as intense as if you were on-prem. And I think a lot of people get the idea of, oh, once we're in the cloud, we're not in control of our data, it's going elsewhere, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, there are differences between on-prem and cloud in those regards, but the understanding the responsibility, understanding where you sit within your data and with your sort of the map of your data is just as intense. It's not as simple as saying, oh, if we move to the cloud, we're secure and we can put all these apps on. And like Nick said, right, 300. I think I saw a presentation from Meg Gale from AppFire over the summer. He talked about the minimum average amount of apps from integrators through to main platforms and stuff for any largest company is minimum 150 always. That's a lot of apps to control. That's a lot of integrations. That's a lot of data flying left, right, and center. Just yesterday, I had to sign a contract and I went through it step by step and I went nitty gritty through the terms and conditions, always necessary. And there was just this, blasé sentence that just said, well, once, we can easily promote and use your data in a way that helps us with our marketing and stuff like that. So not even worrying about, say, personal data or stuff like that, but they could just freely do whatever they wanted. Now, kudos to the vendor and their EULA. They immediately removed it before we signed, so that's fine when we objected. But again, you've got to understand what you're getting into and what are the different conditions and the terms and the shared responsibility of all that different data.
Thank you, Andy. I'd like Marion's opinion also on the matter, and how do you see vendors really addressing these challenges and concerns?
I think as a vendor ourselves, we very often actually do tell the client to, because we are offering a solution that a lot of our clients actually are not on Jira and Confluence before they pick our solution, and then they look into Jira and Confluence. So we introduce the Trust Center to them. And that is the first thing that for them to understand that, okay, if they're going on our app that is Forge, and then, what does it mean? And on that note, also, you probably all already know, or some of you know, that the Runs on Atlassian badge will come out next year. So that will help the customers also to understand, okay, this is a Forge app, and this means that the third party or the marketplace vendor is not going to move their data anywhere, and they can't have any access to that data. So this is really, really important because, if you look at large enterprises where compliance is mission critical and take a compliance solution for a small player, of course they want to make sure that there is no shady player involved in there, right? So they would feel better if I think if they could easily see that it's a Forge app. And of course, Atlassian Guards definitely something worthwhile mentioning to clients. I think other than that, it's I think Atlassian has already become trustworthy and transparent enough. So this is I don't think that Atlassian would have a problem. It's more like how marketplace vendors can prove in demos that what they can do in the agreements, like Andy said, that there is nothing shady going on in EULAs or or in the terms and conditions. So, and of course, the larger the enterprise, the more you'll get the questionnaires, right? Like beautiful questionnaires, 30, 50 pages long of how you built your apps and what are they doing. So going back to validation, in a sense.
Thank you.
Those documents are a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, so much fun.
And sticking with you, Marion, for a bit, and since you've been talking about the vendor side of things, a slight shift, if you mind, and something that we notice a lot in this space. What do you think are the primary reasons for the long lead times for compliance-focused apps, that is, and how can the vendors mitigate all these delays?
Good question.
Mhm.
I don't know if we can really mitigate the delays or if they are even delays. I mean, these compliance-related apps are mission critical. So, and again, like if they are moving from a platform, standalone platform that was meant for just compliance onto Atlassian and plus the apps, they need to make sure that they get at least as, they will have the compliance set, that they won't lose anything, and that takes time for them. They need to feel secured. They need to try them out. 1 month, I don't know, it's never enough to try out for 1 month the compliance app. Normally it requires renewal of the trial several times. So they are, I mean, they are business and compliance mission critical. So it takes the time, but on the other side, it's very sticky because of that. Once they adopt these apps tend to be very, very sticky. So the renewal rate is out of this world. So it can't be compared to just a regular kind of IT app, I would say. But a lot of what we can do is create visibility. I mean, we just last week went to a huge medical device industry event, and still we had people passing our stand there, going like, Atlassian and Jira and Confluence, like, I mean, this is for IT people. Like, we're talking about like medical device product development and compliance here. Like, how is that built in there? And there is I mean, we know that Atlassian is trying to sell more and more the business solutions for business people, but it's still, I think Jira and Confluence are still viewed by business people as something IT department is using. So to get this visibility out there that actually, because software is in most of the safety critical products today, and you need to build safety into the design, these compliance related apps are also important to integrate on these platforms or these tools like Jira and Confluence. So like teaching, doing webinars like this one, being visible in industry events, I think all of this is really, really important. And of course, collaboration. I mean, we can't go, I can't answer any of your questions, I think, actually, without going back to collaboration between solution partners and between vendors, because, I mean, there are so many really good people who have a lot of experience distributed across the ecosystem. And if we just got our heads together and every time somebody has a tricky question, I think we'd be so much more visible and we'd be so much more appreciated by the customers as well.
If anything, this webinar is a collaboration in itself. So there you go.
Exactly.
Nick,
Thanks for that.
Yeah, speaking of which, I wanted to add just a couple of quick things on, to Marion's answer. So we started Upscale 6 months ago, and it might sound crazy, but we're still pre-revenue. And what we found, the reasoning for that is that every customer that cares about what we do, which if you go take a look at Upscale, right? We enact your retention policy and your retention schedules across the information that lives in your Confluence and Jira instances. What that means is we have the power to delete everything, not only delete it, but actually purge it so that it's not recoverable. So what we found is a few things. One, every engagement is a big RFP, and these things just take months. And, banks, healthcare providers, like you name it, all these companies, very, very willing to shift a project out by a quarter or two on the whim of a budget shift or like they're just unsatisfied with some aspect of security. The second thing is they trust, like Marion said this, right? They really want to run our stuff for 6 months or more before they even do anything serious with it. And so there's a long lead time in terms of deal cycles and just engaging with customers, whether it's through a solution partner or directly, that's going to naturally have to happen with some of the compliance applications that you see in market. And then the third thing is there's just not a lot of options for the kinds of things that we're talking about in this webinar today.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yet.
Yeah, that's why we're here, right? I think all of us have a small aspiration, at least, to try and solve a lot of the compliance issues
I think
that
there's one more thing, if I may add. This is actually the willingness of and the openness for vendors to do a lot of calls with these customers, because we have felt through the over 8 years now of how they come in with their own slang, their own vocabulary, and then they kind of probe you like, okay, do you know what this means? Do you know what this acronym means? Because they want to make sure that your stuff is built on their requirements, or at least you know the requirements. And this is extremely important. That without this, I think we couldn't have gotten here today. And there's something that is, I mean, it's tricky also. The know-how has to be in the team, because otherwise they will just go like, you don't know what you're talking about. The app might be great, but the team doesn't know. So.
Thank you. So we've established long lead times to an extent. We've established that there's room for a lot of growth where we are. Andy, what do you think some vendors, or why do you think some vendors are hesitant to focus on compliance products? I know we've had a discussion before in the past, and we've just commented on the fact that it's growing and it's growing and it's growing. But why?
I think that the growth potential is probably, an almost sheer rock face in terms of being able to scale it and climb it and stuff like that. I remember when I was working for Old Street Solutions and helping them with their own strategic growth and stuff before they were acquired by Tempo, that anytime a customer came in and said, when are you going to do your SOC 2 compliance? And everyone would get really excited because this was a huge customer, right? The 50,000 data centers or the 15,000 clouds or whatever. And yet SOC 2 compliance for a marketplace vendor is extremely challenging. And it's very, very difficult, A, to get all your ducks in a row and get it sorted and certified. But it's also very difficult to maintain it. And plus also, once dealing with these huge enterprise customers, they're kind of exactly what Marion said about like, what's our terminology? Do you really understand us? You will just turn into like sort of almost like a subcontracted daughter company in terms of what they want and what they need in terms of their compliance with SOC 2. And it's just one example of the intensity when building any product through the marketplace, but especially so on compliance, because that's when people who are overtly focused on I don't think passionate is the right word, but they're very intently focused on doing their job very well. And that's when it becomes difficult for vendors who are sort of, let's say, they're hesitant to focus on compliance products per se. Every time I get into a call with Marion, it seems like something's changed in her world, and I'm like, how is compliance so rapidly changing? And we were in a call ages ago, and I said, yeah, there's not much difference between the UK and the EU, right? And she's had to explain to me for 10 minutes what are the now changes in security policies, infosec compliance, since Brexit, and it's similar, but it's not similar, and it's splitting, right? So that also creates a lot of, we've got to stay focused, we've got to be very well maintained on this. And on the customer, on the user side, people have to make decisions, right? So they're looking at, well, Jira's already expensive on cloud for us. And, well, we wanted to try this Rovo thing. That's more money. Oh, we love Script Runner and SoftComply and and they're starting to make decisions that's more about their budgets and stuff like that. And business cases, how does that fit in? So I think that there is a lot of there's maybe a gap, and I don't think I have the answer to this. Like, is the hesitation stemming from a lack of demand, or is it like the perceived complexity of wanting to dive into it? I personally, I don't know that one. I don't think I have enough subject matter expert knowledge for it.
Maybe Nick can help us though on the complexity side. Do you think it's a lack of demand, or perhaps the perceived complexity of compliance?
Yeah, I think it's actually a bit of both, and a little bit of market timing too. A lot of the time in the conversations we're having at Upscale, it still feels a bit early and everyone's playing a bit of catch up. So, here's one example. I mentioned earlier that the average business you look at today has a portfolio of over 340 SaaS apps. I know the minimum that, Andy, I think you mentioned was 150. That number is actually coming down at the moment as organizations implement better information management programs with cloud services in mind. So, for example, one area is that shadow IT is slowing down because companies are now more capable of providing the things that their teams of of people actually need to get their work done. While some of it's also just plain budget stuff, it's kind of indicative that there's some maturity that is emerging across, our customer base as well. Now, in my view, there's much more of, compliance applications to come. But then you have the perceived pains of compliance, and in particular non-compliance, and sometimes people just want to stay out of that. So let me explain this in a more human way. First up, it can seem like a huge surface area of arcane regulations and framework requirements that you must comply with 100%. But the reality is that we're very human, right? So every human in management running a business, one of your customers, one of our customers, we tend to trade that off against whether or not anything's happened to us yet and our perception of the risk of that thing happening to us, right? And it's always like, well, that won't happen to us. That was, a breach over there. Or something similar. And so I think that a lot of the time that pain has to emerge for the people in order for them to recognize that compliance is now, despite its complexity, a high demand item for them. So the kinds of companies that we are talking to at OpusGuard this year have clear rules and they have serious regulators that enforce them. And that can be punitive, it can be damaging, or they have high value intellectual property and they're in litigation fairly frequently, or they have loads of personal data that they deal with, or they've had a number of security breaches in which old information ended up compromised and making that breach outcome worse than it could have been. So those customers, they feel the pain now and they're actively seeking the painkiller for it. And I think in time, more of that comes along as, more of us make it clear that you can have pretty big effects with relatively contained investments and efforts to start.
I think just as a very tiny sub point as well, like from the user side, is like really caring about what you're doing and how and who you're interacting with. And again, that like, do I understand what I'm getting into? And not just accepting terms and conditions willy-nilly. That's why bigger companies have the time to send huge RFPs with their documents and their million questions, right? So from a user side, like what's my care level? How much am I invested in this?
Thank you. Thank you all very much. That was the end of theme 1. So we're going to move into the ecosystem and the standards that sit within the ecosystem. And Andy, you're probably one of the biggest personalities and the well-known people in the ecosystem. So I'm going to hand this question over to you. Just an overview of what you think the current state of the ecosystem is. And if you can highlight any maybe significant short-term or long-term changes.
Yeah, that's a good one. If you want to see my poster boy stuff where it looks like I love Atlassian, LinkedIn, Instagram, those are normally the places I'm posting good, positive stuff. If you want to see my attempt at trying to be Donald Trump or Elon Musk when it comes to Atlassian themes, definitely follow my X account. That is a no holds barred arena where I'm just like, what is going on? I think long-term changes, the ecosystem really has to get around this idea of to say it very short, cloud, enterprise, premium. Like everything that is being built around, they want a profitable company where the shareholders have very good return on investment. And yeah, you can see that bit by bit, they've been building slowly towards this more consolidated platform where everything is on there. I've been having great chats, both publicly, but also behind the scenes with Alex of the Jira Life and Ape Tech tutorials about, oh, they're copying Jira. So now Jira's copying Trello. So, okay, they'll kill Trello eventually, right? So there's definitely long-term changes, bigger consolidation. We see it again with acquisitions, solution partners buying solution partners and marketplace buying marketplace and stuff like that. On the short term, though, there's a lot that's going on constantly. Week in, week out, we get different updates, we get different messages and stuff like that. So the short term is very highly tied to the long term. You can just see the threads. The threads are coming slowly together, and that will impact on the long term changes. I think it's a bit harsh, so I'm going to put my X.com mode on, but Atlassian is, for me, it's definitely starting to care less and less and less about data center, and they're definitely starting to sort of care less about let's call it the smaller people. I think that both smaller marketplace vendors, smaller solution partners, smaller companies are going to notice an impact when you're not paying premium and when you're not on cloud and stuff like that. Fun Inc., we are applying for Atlassian startups, right? It's a whole program to help startups, everything free for a whole year. You have to go through all sorts of different applications and stuff like that. But yeah, you know, we already set budget aside when we started the company and say, what are we going to pay for on our platforms and stuff like that. But the short changes are going to be the short-term changes. You will notice it amongst the people that have a little bit of the heels in the sand, maybe even the head in the sand, and they aren't really paying attention to how it's impacting them. So right now, whenever I'm at an event or I'm out and about, talking to someone, say 5,000 users on data center, these people are noticing price changes. These people are noticing like a lower quality and support than perhaps they were used to 10 years ago. That is definitely, you know, there's a lot of these little short-term changes, and if you tie it all in the threads up to long-term, that for me is where the ecosystem is at the moment.
Eye-opening. Thank you, Andy. Another person with heaps of knowledge and a long career, I would say, in the ecosystem is you, Nick. And to touch on what Andy was saying about the move away from data center and the move migrating to cloud, what are the a brief overview, if you may, of key regulations and frameworks a lot of these organizations need to consider when migrating to the cloud?
Yeah, sure thing. I'll try and keep it brief and I'll put it into 4 key areas. First up, there's a long list of all the possibilities that might apply to your business depending on where you're based and where you operate. And I'll be brutally honest, having good guidance for this helps. So, for example, you can take advantage of things like ChatGPT to get a good summary of the list of things that might apply to your business. It's not perfect. And you can also engage an expert compliance partner. And I think that's an opportunity for solution partners in the Atlassian ecosystem to become that, at least, you know, for the use of Atlassian cloud products across their customer base. So just know that it's going to look very big to start out. But second, I believe that we should all take a step back and kind of remember to do the first things first. We don't want to boil the ocean when it comes to compliance, because it's not going to be good for anybody. So we all know about GDPR, and frankly, we should pretty much already have our businesses kind of ready for that and be practicing and improving efficiency and compliance, you know, whenever possible. But very similar regulation is or is being implemented across various jurisdictions globally, including here in California, in Australia, in the United Kingdom. In fact, over 1,000 similar laws have been passed in recent years globally that talk about the same kinds of concerns. The third area is that in specific industries, I think Marion mentioned this very early on, you may have applicable vertical regulations or frameworks that you need to comply with. So for financial sector, it's FINRA and DORA is coming, and there's others in different, you know, jurisdictions and markets. In healthcare and health products, you have HIPAA and various FDA regulations. So you should get awareness of these kinds of things for your specific industry. And then finally, there's some good information security frameworks that provide a really solid foundation for any business operating their information in someone's cloud. And in fact, Atlassian themselves are now moving to a model where to achieve certain partner tiers, you have to demonstrate that you have one of the two, either ISO 27001, and if you're doing that now, you're going to be compliant with the 2022 version of that, not the 2013 version, or you need to have SOC 2 Type 2. And you need to be able to demonstrate those things with a trust center that's publicly available. So if you started with those 4 things in mind, it takes some time to become a habit internally and to practice well, to know where you should invest first and where you can kind of, you know, schedule and phase things out. But if you do those things and you don't have to do everything, you know, the first category immediately, then you'll have covered a lot of ground with, you know, GDPR readiness, with any specific vertical regulations that apply to you, and with either, you know, one of the ISO. In fact, there's a few ISOs that talk about information security, or, you know, you've got your SOC 2 kind of done. There's a lot of other specific directives and so on in different markets and you know, legislative jurisdictions, but those are the 3 big areas that I think will get you pretty far.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nick. And just to touch on this a bit more, and because I know the good work that you do, Marion, with SoftComply, especially in regulated environments, are there any particular compliance standards you find that organizations in the ecosystem struggle with during migrations?
I think validation. I always have to come back to the documented change control of Jira, Bitbucket, and Confluence, but also the third-party apps. So another thing that is much easier in data center, because every time you need to update a version, then you do a manual test of the main functionalities, the critical functionalities of these platforms or tools. But if you're on cloud, that changes much more rapidly. You cannot really do it manually. So, and also you might not have the know-how. So it's coming back to the DC and cloud, this kind of conflict or the problem for the customers is that you look at Atlassian data center that you can manually, you can configure any which way. You are in control of it. You have apps that you can validate yourself if you need to, and you can validate also the platform tools yourself because you have the IT team to do that. And then you're thinking of cloud and all those elements that are still out there that are not fixed yet. Like Atlassian hasn't yet provided it for their own tools. Some apps have it, some don't have it, some have the knowledge, some don't have it. And then you look as a regulated industry, your alternative is to look at specifically built compliant platform tools that have built from the point of view of compliance first. So not a generic IT tool like IT platform, but a compliance solution that that large medtechs, for example, are using today. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's a very I mean, the reason why we need to come together and we need to help each other out in the ecosystem is that if the data center client today looks at the options of going Atlassian cloud or a completely different solution, we need to be up there and saying, hey, this is actually doable on cloud, that you can stay with Atlassian. And for that, I think we need more collaboration with Atlassian between solution partners and between vendors to actually get there. Sorry, I don't know. I'm not even sure what I answered actually.
That's great. That's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And something that we've circled around a bit, but probably haven't really answered. And I want Nick for this because you kind of touched on it already. How should businesses really prioritize their compliance efforts to avoid feeling overwhelmed during the cloud adoption, right? Any tips? Anything that you can suggest?
Yeah, and I might sound a bit repetitive here, but that's okay because a lot of the time repeating the message is what's needed to sort of take it on. So the first thing I'll say is don't take it on all at once, which I just said a few minutes ago. There's potentially a lot to compliance, but taking the first steps first is really important to building a practice and real awareness in your business, and making sure that your employees are aware and being trained and what have you. So for those that haven't already begun, starting simple and establishing some kind of GRC function internally, I believe is a great step. And that function needs to be looking at your cloud and SaaS adoption across the business. Now, many businesses have this in some form already, especially if they're a little bit more mature or they're larger. But if you're a small business, it doesn't mean hiring a full-time person to begin. For example, it's one of the hats I wear as COO for Opus, and I know for a fact that we're certainly not compliant with all of the regulations and frameworks that we would attempt to do, and we're working on that stuff internally because I've got the GRC function. The typical first step once that's in place is to do some kind of readiness assessment. So to figure out, what you need to face up to, think about that answer I gave a few minutes ago, and then how far away from facing up to the key parts of those things you are. I think that's a really good, strong step because it helps you get a handle on which regulations you need to comply with, which frameworks you want to comply with, and why, what effects those things will have. And then you got to think about the priority order in which to deal with the things that are emerging from that readiness assessment. And as I said before, I think that if a lot of companies went for GDPR coverage and either ISO 27001, 2022 update or SOC 2 Type 2, put in regular employee training, and put in health checks, what does it look like to remain compliant? Like, are you validating, as Marion said, each time an upgrade gets done, and you're making sure that everything's working correctly? Are you making sure that the retention schedule is being applied correctly, as your ISO 27001 compliance is claiming that it does? But of course, most companies are not doing that automated. They're doing it sort of manually as and when they think about it. All of that stuff is kind of important. I think that would cover a lot of ground and eventually becomes just general course of doing business, routine habits. And I suppose since we specialize in retention management and information hygiene here at OpusGuard, I should remind everyone that there are tools now like ours and like Marion's to help you with compliance solutions, to help reduce employee errors and distractions, to keep your content fresh for both operational and employee kind of efficiency reasons, but also the coming wave of AI, right? If you feed AI models internally old, stale, out of date information, you're going to get confusing, unusable answers into the heads of your employees over time. So if you do all of that, you can kind of rest easier knowing that at least a part of your business is a little bit cleaner.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. And thank you all. That was the end of theme 2. And we'll go on to theme 3, which I know Marion has touched on a bit on the collaboration side, but it's the compliance opportunities and the partnerships that we can all utilize within the ecosystem. And the first question probably should go to Andy for something he's quite passionate about. And how do Atlassian's recent changes through RFCs affect our marketplace apps? And that's just not for me and Marion and Nick, it's for everyone. Tricky. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, my bad. So for me, it's really you've got to break it down, right? So classic risk management, right? So what's your opportunities, what's your threats, severity, impact, all that sort of stuff. So RFC is always going to happen within Atlassian and the developer world. From a marketplace perspective, it's like, understand what the change is, understand the impact on you and how it's going to impact the organization that's building the apps. So for some partners, there's a lot of opportunities in what's going on. So we've seen the big one is it's either 60 or 68, can't remember off the top of my head, about the monetization, right, and how all of that is working. Within that, for example, they want to introduce editions, which I fully stand behind. I can't believe that marketplace is now 12 years plus old. We still don't have editions, and so there's 2 apps: the free one with not so much cool stuff, and the paid one that you need to upgrade to get the cool features and everything like that. So again, ironically, we talk about compliance in this webinar, which involves a lot of risk management. SoftComply, little mini shout out. And so yeah, it's all about the risk management and understanding what those changes are going to introduce. There are some RFCs that completely destroy individual marketplace vendors' business, actually, in a way, which is insane. But yeah, the RFCs will introduce different. We talked earlier about complexities, right, and the willingness for a marketplace app to focus on compliance. So yeah. Complexities are being introduced, and what I find very difficult for marketplace apps, and Funding might have a solution for that this time next year, is if you're focused on your commercial growth, if you are, you're all about your growth, you're all about providing the best UX and experience for your users, right? Suddenly an RFC happens, and then you need to understand how that's impacting you and changing it. But you might be small, right? You might be the OpusGuard startups, but you might be Tempo or AppFire. Even Tempo and AppFire don't necessarily have a team that solely will only focus on running through RFCs. They'll have someone who's responsible for it, but not teams, right? So the impact is pretty big. The effect on people is very large, but we'll see where Funding is this time next year with a solution to that.
Thank you. To touch a bit more on this, and considering the perspective of solution partners, who may not prioritize compliance products? How can vendors better position these solutions to appeal to a wider audience? I think that's for Marion mainly, because she's been in the ecosystem for a very long time around compliance and
Yeah, well, we have been around for a long time, but we actually started working with solution partners only a year ago because we kind of went straight to the end user and we went alone to industry events, and then we realized that actually a solution partner would be really handy because a lot of times we went to the industry event and the potential client comes and goes like, okay, your stuff is really cool. So you are Jira? And I'm like, no, I'm Marion. And they go like, okay, what is Jira? So it was all very, very complicated for a small vendor to start selling Jira. And it would be so much easier if at that point we realized to have a solution partner next to us going like, okay, let me tell you about Jira and Confluence. What are the benefits? What are the different tiers and platforms and all that? And it then kind of a little over a year ago, we started to kind of talk to solution partners and see if there is any synergies and if we can maybe work together closer. And because between vendors, I think I found it quite easy to chat, ask Nick about, what should we do? Can we recommend you there? Or, because regulated industries, they need specific things, and then it was quite easy to get to talking to each other. But to the larger solution partners, it was always a bit of a problem because I mean this is not a bulk sale app, right? You can't sell it like to all the clients at the same time because it requires this specific know-how. You need to know where the client is, what are they using today. I mean, are they doing it manually, the compliance things, and then they can automate it more easily because they're already on Jira, or are they on standalone solution and they are like, business people are like, oh, I don't know, this Jira sounds really, something completely different, and we don't know how to use it. It has so, complex system and ticketing, and I don't know how does compliance fit into this picture. So in that case, there is much more convincing to do, I think, from the vendor part. But I think a lot of joint events with solution partners definitely work. Be it webinars or going to events together, joint blog posts, of course, for case studies or use cases that with the same customers would work well. But and then of course the kind of the learning from each other. So understanding what is the problem or the pain point for the solution partner with their customers and how we as vendors could help them. And maybe also then to share this experience that we as vendors have. So a lot of talking, chatting, joining in demos, because a lot of times, again, like if a solution partner has somebody interested in, for example, risk management in medical device field, and this customer wants to do this kind of probing of like, okay, do you know what is FMEA? Do you know what hazard analysis really means? So kind of like testing out, then solution partner also wins when the vendor is there who already has experience with that type of question. So more collaboration, yay! every question is answered with the same thing: more collaboration.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for that. I'm going to shift the mood a bit, and with Nick, I'd like you to just touch on regarding the growing information glut in SaaS applications and what that means for compliance apps and compliance in general, and how businesses in the ecosystem, or maybe in general, can tackle this.
Great. There are 6 substantial problems that we characterize at Opus pertaining specifically to having old information lingering around in SaaS apps instead of being regularly aged out and dealt with, disposed of. Data compliance issues, and we've talked about the regulations and frameworks quite a lot here today already. Security risks, old information being compromised and misused when it could have been deleted is a bad thing. That can lead to reputation and brand or perception damage. Loss of valuable intellectual property that perhaps is no longer as relevant to your business, but informs others as to how you got to where you are, for example. Operational inefficiencies and excess costs. The more stuff you keep around in your SaaS systems, the more the vendors of those things want to charge you for it. And then finally, obsolete and inaccurate information causing distractions, whether that's for human employees or for AI models that I mentioned before. And I'll pause there because I know that we're running out of time.
Thanks. To that extent, I know, Andy, you have quite a few things on your mind regarding retention policies, and defensible deletion play a critical role in managing this information.
Yeah. We are running out of time, so the short answer is it goes back to your 3 Ps, right? Processes, products, people. And what I find brilliant is how many people forget the people part, the roles, the responsibilities, all that sort of stuff. Fun story short, I worked for one company and they are all about future tech and lots of R&D, this cool encryption stuff. But they still had physical documents over, I think they're now 60 years. They've been around for 6 years. All the documentation went and got stored at the company I then went to work for a few years later. And I remember there was a project whereby documentation had to be digitized, digital transformation, and then destroyed. But the best part was it was like the is it the Sarbanes-Oxley Act or whatever? Like the company was working with the 7-year policy, right? So after we store 7 years, digitize, destroy. But the person who had to approve that from company number 1 was gone. And the facilities team in charge of data destruction and organizing it with their third party were just like, well, no one can approve it. And that was maddening to me. And they kept coming to me like, oh, you used to work for them. Can you go have a chat? Yeah, sure. I went and had a chat. And they just went, well, the owners of the documents from that department aren't here anymore. What do we do? There's no policy for those good retention policies, especially with like defensible deletion and that defensible stuff about, how do we run our records management? But they didn't think about, well, if that person's gone, what do we do? And it had to be, so at the third party vendor, it had to be that person and their signature. And there's no policy in place what to do if they're gone, which is maddening. 7 years, anything can happen, right? And now apply that to your Jiras, apply it to your Slacks, etc., etc. A lot of people have shared inboxes, and sometimes those shared inboxes control, say, like a master admin for the platforms, right? So what happens if you lose access to that one? How do you get your tools back? Hey, I'm Funman at Atlassian. I need access to my Atlassian administration. Like, oh, good joke, Funman, right? That's the kind of stuff that might happen there. So yeah, they're critical. It's so critical.
Thank you, Andy. Seeing that we're 1 minute before ending, we have one question from the Q&A that is from Jax Kane. I know on some extent, we kind of already answered some of it, but if anyone wants to quick fire it and just do a quick summary on it, feel free. I know Andy was very...
I left the Atlassian ecosystem until this year in 2018. So I'm going to let one of the other two take this one.
I don't know. I don't know if there is a vendor that proactively does that. I know the ones who have data center up are most of them still maintaining them, and there are solution partners that are very heavily involved in data center. Or there are solution partners who I think are working more with data center than cloud. So I don't know any app vendors that are proactively doing just data center though.
Thank you, Marion. And
maybe Andy knows. I don't know. But then there was another question I think about balancing compliance with what was that? Compliance with fast-growing, constantly evolving companies. So there, I would say, just keep it real. I mean, compliance is not something put on top of you. You have to make it work in your company, in a small team. We see medical device developers, just 2 people having a quality management, the same regulations as a very large medtech. They can do it. It's just that you do what you do, and you don't document things you do not do. You just document things that you do, and keep them documented. Keep the processes flowing. Make it part of your work and everyday life. And like Nick said, then it will work out. It's just don't take it as the standard recommends it to you. Take it as make it a part of your work.
I think the only answer, like the only thing, it's a little bit of a switch up, but to the point of the Q&A, like specifically like which companies are coming in to fill that void? None of them. On-prem is so expensive to maintain and support. And yeah, I'm based in the Netherlands, and I've seen since the mid 2000s, it's just cloud. It's all cloud. There's just huge data centers of cloud companies offering their cloud product and stuff. So, and I think every time I talk to a data center customer, and I'm telling them all about the reasons why they need to move very rapidly from data center. One of them being the Atlassian shareholders just don't care. They're not in it for great UX and caring about end users. They, bang for their buck and all that. So it's like, well, consider when you will move in the next 5 to 7 years, maybe 10 years, or face the option that you have no choice. And your option could be stay on a deprecated system where nothing works and you're really upset and struggling, and that will lead to huge compliance challenges and risks, right? Your infosec on depleted deprecated systems will be madness. Yeah, that's it, right? And you've got to make very good calculated, forecasted, good analyses on where you will be in 5 years time, 10 years time, etc.
And that kind of is the fear that I have, that if there is no good solution, end-to-end solution for them on cloud, they probably move somewhere else, right? So
yeah.
This is something we all want to avoid. I believe.
Yeah. Fun man's on-prem services.
That's your next big thing. Anyways, we're 3 minutes past and it's time to wrap up, unfortunately. If any of the panelists have something they want to add, feel free to do so.
I have one thing. So I know I talked a lot about collaboration, and we have this compliance and Atlassian group. If any vendors here are interested, or solution partners are interested in joining that to discuss and share experiences, ask questions on all things compliance related on Atlassian ecosystem, then please let Dimitris know.
Every single one of us now. Yes.
Everybody is there. We're all there.
Absolutely. And from me, thank you for the opportunity to join and collaborate together today on this topic of compliance in the cloud.
Exactly. If you took one thing from this session, it's collaboration. So yeah, thank you all for the insights. I know compliance is quite the complex topic to try and navigate, especially within Atlassian. And I hope everyone that attended found this session valuable. Again, we will be sharing the recording, so stay tuned. And that is basically the end. Thank you very much,
Chris.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.